Matt, let's go to you. Well, I mean, we don't have an election season coming up right away, but but certainly the e-voting thing is something that's people have been paying attention to, and so it sounds like we have an example here.
So we have a little bit of good news, I think, but the reason for it is some really awful security. So the Virginia State Board of Elections just decertified a horrendously insecure voting machine, the AVS WinVote from Advanced Voting Systems, which, by the way, is no longer a company as far as I can tell. So for me, the company goes out of business, I would immediately start decertifying the machines because there's no patches forthcoming.
Right.
Anyway, this one was pretty bad. Each machine apparently used WEP for Wi-Fi, which anybody who's been around for a while knows WEP is dead, long dead. I think in 2004, the IAAA started telling people to stop using this, and these were still using them. And it had a number of horrendously insecure default passwords for the administrator account on the machine and for the database key for the Access database storing the vote tallies. There's an article on Ars Technica and a really good write-up on the Freedom to Tinker blog about these machines. And they basically walk you through how would somebody with minimal technical knowledge hack an election. And it basically, you step through, you crack WEP, which are tools to do this very easily. You connect to and one of the several open ports on this machine for administrative access, and then you copy the database out after decrypting it, modify the database, and put it back in place. And you've owned the election. Now there are comments on the Freedom to Tinker blog, which I found were pretty interesting. Somebody, I think from Virginia, was talking about whether or not this is really a feasible attack, whether or not doing this at scale makes sense, what human factors there are in place to prevent someone from tampering with like one voting machine, if the relative levels of, say, Democrat versus Republican votes are relatively the same across a number of machines, and the one machine that got owned was skewed way out of whack, might mean something to them as well. But I mean, if these machines are supposed to be the front line of defense against this kind of vote tampering, this is not the kind of machine you want doing the job.
No, it's a good example of how you probably would not design it. It wasn't planned ahead, was it?
Well, no, I mean,
or perhaps some of the details weren't worked out. So it's been decertified in the state of Virginia.
Correct.
Now, are we expecting this to propagate to other
I haven't
states?
heard anything about that, but I would certainly, if I had to, recommend something, I would say get these machines replaced as soon as you possibly can. Now, replacing them, of course, try and have somebody who understands the technology find you a replacement hardware at this point. Hopefully, one, something that has support going forward in the future, so any further flaws can be found. And two, someone who has, hopefully, experience in designing these sorts of systems.
Great.
So is that going to come out of my taxes, replacing all these voting machines?
Yes, it
And that is a concern, of course, that the cost of these devices. I mean, I think somewhere in the comments of that same Freedom to Tinker blog, someone said somebody's fighting to keep these machines, and probably not for the right reasons. And I would assume, my assumption, is that they're keeping them because they don't have the funds to replace them and roll out new hardware. And that's going to be a problem. Legacy hardware sticks around, even when it really ought not to.
Yeah. So I think fundamentally this is one of the questions, does it really come down to having to replace the hardware, or is it really sort of a, kind of a generic platform that somebody could replace the software? But it's a hypothetical question.
Well, these machines are running Windows XP embedded.
Yeah.
So there might be a path forward. If someone wants to jump into the weeds and come up with a replacement software for this hardware, they might have a business plan out of that, but.
Yeah. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, no, I know at least one of the counties that was fighting to keep them, that was their stated reason for wanting to keep them, though, was they didn't have the money to replace them.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but so this becomes a balance. There are probably some monitoring techniques that could be put into place to detect some kind of a significant, if you have to download the database and basically load it back up. That seems like some basic monitoring would be.
Change the passwords on the thing? I mean, that'll help a little bit, I mean, still the WEP is an issue, but.
Yeah, so there are some possibilities and, basically some baling wire and bubble gum that might be able to help.
I'm probably not the first to say this, but I think it would be a great idea if you came up with an open voting system platform. You know, most people will freak out because you're saying, holy crap, you're releasing the source code to your critical voting systems to the world. But the same thing goes for OpenSSL, other projects where everyone relies upon it for a critical function. And more eyeballs, in theory, means better code or more secure code.
Well, and there were some pretty good open source ones developed by some of the top security researchers in the field a number of years back, and nobody bought them. So.
Yeah, that's kind of curious. I'm not sure what the reasoning behind that was, but if it's a security reason, if you're going to, you can always pay or create basically a consortium to evaluate the security of the platform. And I think there would be at least enough devices that you'd be selling that you could amortize the cost of a good security evaluation across the system. So maybe there were other reasons that it just didn't take off.
I just realized I said things like OpenSSL, and then I remembered Heartbleed, and I might have invalidated my own argument there.
Well, no, actually, in the grand scheme of things, there were problems with it, clearly, but now a foundation's been set up that basically does security evaluation. I think that's part of the reasons that we were able to, there was the Heartbleed, and then we had the Boodle and the Ghost and a few other things. That's partly been shaken out because a renewed interest or in looking at the security attributes. And the same thing could be done here.